I no longer trust soft voices behind closed doors. They're never empty. The first thing I noticed wasn't the table or the smell of warm wine. It was the shoes by the door. 2 pairs. One belonged to Reed. The other was Frank's. Brown leather, polished but worn where his heel presses hardest. I hadn't even realized he'd left the house before me. Or maybe I had, and I just didn't question it anymore. I wasn't invited to this dinner. No one said it outright, but no one thought I'd come either. Reed had mentioned something vague about just keeping things simple tonight, and Maddie hadn't replied to my message. Still, I baked the cobbler. Out of habit, I think. Or maybe I wanted to see if they would eat it without me. The baking dish was heavy, and I carried it the way I always had, with both hands, using the old towel with the blue border that had once matched my kitchen curtains. The towel had a faint brown stain in one corner. Coffee. From the morning, Frank spilled it, but never apologized. I never washed it out completely. I wanted it to fade on its own. I stepped inside without knocking. The front door was unlocked. Maddie was already standing at the far end of the table, one hand resting on her belly like a charm. She turned slowly when she saw me. "Oh," she said, "Betty, you made it." I didn't answer. My arms ached from holding the dish too long. I walked past them and placed it on the sideboard. There was no room on the table. Frank appeared from the hallway. He looked at me, then looked past me. His hands were empty. No plate, no cup, no gesture. Only that old mouth crease he wears when he doesn't want to be noticed. Reed's voice rose from the other side of the table. "We were just about to toast." He lifted his glass with a grin that stretched a little too far. Big news. I knew it already. I knew it. The way Maddie's hand stayed on her stomach. The way Frank avoided my eyes the second wineglass she had poured for herself before anyone else. The celebration wasn't for all of us. It was for her. "I'm pregnant," she said. Her tone was bright, measured. It didn't tremble. "Surprise." Reed turned to me, his face lit up like a boy who'd won a prize at the fair. "You're going to be a grandma." I nodded. My throat was dry. I couldn't remember the last time he called me Mom like he used to. "Just you now, just a placeholder." Frank hadn't sat down yet. He moved toward the window, adjusting the curtain that didn't need adjusting. Maddie crossed the room. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hand never leaving her belly. She stopped just beside me, leaning in slightly. Her voice didn't rise above a whisper. "You thought it was Reed's," she murmured. "Betty, I'm carrying Frank's child." I didn't flinch. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I just looked at her face. It was calm, almost reverent, like someone reciting a prayer they didn't believe in. Behind her, Reed laughed at something in the room I could no longer hear. Maddie turned away from me and rejoined him at the table. Frank remained silent, still by the window, still not looking at me. The room carried on like I hadn't arrived. I felt the towel slip from my fingers. It fell silently to the floor beside the sideboard, the corner with the coffee stain folding under itself. No one noticed. I stepped back slowly. No one turned. Not even Reed. Maddie picked up her glass. "To family," she said. "To family," Frank echoed, though it sounded more like a rehearsal than a toast. The condensation on the dish lid had begun to bead. A single droplet slid down the side of the glass, catching the light, before it disappeared onto the wood. I stood and watched it vanish. I remembered the first time I held Reed in a hospital room full of lilies. Frank had brought them. I told him they were too strong, too fragrant. He didn't listen. He never did not, really. Outside, the porch light flickered twice. The bulb had been dying for weeks, but no one had replaced it. I walked out without taking the dish. My palms still smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. At the edge of the path, I paused. The steps beneath me were cracked in one corner, the cement uneven from a winter frost 2 years ago. Frank said he would fix it in the spring. Spring had come and gone. I looked down at my hands. They were empty. My ring had left a faint impression on my skin slightly deeper than usual. I had twisted it earlier during Maddie's whisper. I hadn't even realized. The smell of peaches lingered behind me. Maddie didn't thank me for the cobbler. No one had to say anything. The door stayed closed. No voice called after me. No apology was offered. No confusion, no denial. Just absence. I once believed I was part of something that couldn't unmake itself. Now I simply believe in the silence. And tonight I chose to answer it. I used to think compromise meant love. Maybe it was just a quiet way of asking to be erased. "I think she's trying to charm Cole too," the neighbor once whispered, folding her grocery bag like the secret might spill out. But I saw him leaving the side door around 6, shirt undone. Looked like he hadn't slept. I didn't respond. I had been up early that day too. I had noticed the coffee pot was nearly empty before I touched it. Cole was a good worker. Quiet, polite, the kind who nodded more than he spoke. Maddie liked to bring him lemonade in the heat. Once she asked me if we had a pitcher. I handed her one I'd kept from my mother's set, pressed glass scalloped rim. She filled it with ice and cucumber slices and smiled. "Frank said I could ask Cole about planting something." "Sensual," she murmured, touching her necklace like it was a new habit. I watched her walk out with the tray. I didn't say anything. Later that week, I saw her hand him a white envelope. He folded it in half and slid it into his back pocket without reading. I pretended I hadn't seen. The hedge that day was overgrown. I told myself that was what I was looking at. In the months before the dinner, I tried small things. Quiet things. I changed the way I baked the family cornbread, used almond milk instead of buttermilk, because Maddie said dairy made her feel heavy. I thought maybe it would make her feel welcomed, or at least less inconvenienced. When she cooked, which was rare, I cleaned after her without being asked. One evening, she looked at the spotless stove and muttered, "You know, not everything has to be sterile." I wasn't sure if she meant the kitchen or me. I stopped correcting Reed when he called her the glue in the family. I nodded. I smiled. I let the sentence fall like a coat I didn't want to wear. There was a time she lost a necklace, a fine chain with a teardrop stone, pale green. She'd left it at a pawn shop, probably to cover some sudden expense. I recognized it when I walked past the display window. I didn't ask how it got there. I bought it back and left it in her jewelry box, tucked beneath a velvet pouch. She never mentioned finding it. I never asked. Frank stopped sitting at the table for coffee. He said the chair was uncomfortable. I bought a cushion. It stayed in its packaging on the back porch for weeks. There was a Sunday Maddie hosted brunch. Her friends arrived with overdone nails and undercooked opinions. I was pouring coffee when one of them asked her if she felt weird living with her in-laws. "Betty's not really in the way," Maddie answered. "She floats around like a hotel ghost. You barely notice unless you bump into her." I didn't drop the coffee pot. I didn't leave the room. I just reached for another cup and smiled. Reed laughed too hard at a joke that wasn't funny. I began staying upstairs more often. I told myself I was tired, or that the stairs were good for my knees. I took meals on a tray. No one questioned it. Maddie once left a note. "You don't have to hide." It wasn't folded, just left flat on the counter with a cherry pit pressed into the corner like a paperweight. I watched the hydrangeas wilt outside my window. I didn't water them. I told myself maybe someone else would. When Reed forgot my birthday, I didn't remind him. When Maddie invited her mother to host Thanksgiving properly, I offered to make the gravy and stay out of the kitchen. Her mother brought instant packets anyway. That night, Frank sat beside me and patted my knee like I was a guest who overstayed her welcome. "I think Maddie's trying her best," he said. I nodded. My hands were folded over my apron, the one with the tiny green threads at the hem. I used to wear it when Reed was little. It still smelled like starch and lemon oil. You've always been a bit exacting, he added. I didn't respond. I folded the apron slowly and placed it on my lap. There was a dinner party where someone asked if I was Frank's sister. Maddie laughed and said, God, no. She just hasn't updated her wardrobe since 1982. I smiled. I smoothed the collar of my blouse. It was one I'd saved from my teaching days. Cotton high-neck pale cream with faded roses. I once gave up my Tuesday book club to help Maddie with errands. I never rejoined. There was a time she left her prenatal vitamins on the sink. I reordered them when I noticed the bottle was low. I didn't tell her. She posted online that Frank had done it, tagged him with hearts. I began keeping a small notebook in my purse, not for appointments, just for lists, things I used to do, meals I had once cooked, names of people who used to call. I remember standing in the hallway one evening. The thermostat was blinking. Maddie walked past me and turned it down without speaking. I told myself silence meant peace. But that was before I realized how much noise it takes to forget yourself. At some point, they stopped saying thank you. I stopped expecting it. It wasn't that they pushed me out. I think I stepped back slowly, deliberately, and no one reached for me. No one noticed I had moved. No one missed the space I left. I wasn't excluded. I had tried so hard to belong, I made myself vanish. Some envelopes don't hold letters. They hold endings. It was tucked in the drawer Reed never used. The one with old takeout menus, a couple of keys to doors we no longer locked, and a sewing kit with only gray thread left. The envelope was unmarked, unsealed, soft at the corners, like it had been handled too many times without being read. I opened it once. Just once. Long enough to see 3 names and one line that decided everything. Frank Whitaker, excluded. Reed Whitaker, excluded. Cole Ramsey, not excluded. The paper didn't shake in my hand. That's something people imagine, I think. I just folded it back neatly and slid it in as if nothing had happened. But something had. The kind of something that doesn't announce itself. It just settles into your lungs and changes how deep you breathe. There had been a moment weeks earlier when I passed by the kitchen and heard Maddie's voice low and clipped. Frank stood by the sink, his back rigid. Don't you dare back out now, Frank. You know what's at stake. I didn't hear his reply. The refrigerator had started humming, and I let the sound fill in what I didn't need to know. After that, he never looked me straight in the eye. Not once. I found the envelope days later. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I told myself it had shifted when I was looking for a screwdriver, but screwdrivers don't hide in drawers like that. Truth does. Reed still believed it was his child. He spoke about cribs and baby shoes as if they were extensions of himself. He showed me a photo of a changing table Maddie had bookmarked. Pine wood. Clean lines. She's got taste, he said. I nodded. The screen had cracked across the bottom corner of his phone, but he hadn't fixed it. I wondered what else he wasn't fixing. He'd begun gambling again, though he never used the word. Just market plays and quick doubles. Maddie called it entrepreneurial. Better than wasting time like your mother, she once whispered when she thought I was asleep in the den. The door was open. It always was. She sent me a birthday text last year. Happy birthday. Hope Frank does something sweet. No card, no cake, no voice. Frank didn't mention it. Reed forwarded me a link to a gardening article I'd already read. The hydrangeas were wilting by then. I had once thought pregnancy made women softer. Maddie seemed sharper. Every word deliberate, like she was choosing from a script she'd written for herself and didn't trust anyone else to revise. Cole came by less often. His boots stayed clean. His truck never lingered. He stopped accepting lemonade. One morning, Maddie left a note for Frank Boy almond milk. And don't forget the prenatal appointment. She didn't sign it. She folded it twice the way someone folds a bill they don't plan to tip with. Frank tucked it into his jacket and walked out without a word. I remembered when Reed brought Maddie home the first time. She wore yellow flats and a scarf in her hair. She smiled too much. Her compliments felt rehearsed. After she left, I found a lipstick stain on the wine glass she used. Coral. Not her color. Maddie once joked that I reminded her of a retired librarian who alphabetizes her tea bags. I smiled and offered her chamomile. In the attic, there's a box labeled baby things. Inside are Reed's first shoes, a rattle, and a card that reads, "To the most beautiful boy. I haven't opened it in years. I don't know if I ever will again." Maddie talks to the baby like it's already listening. She sings out of tune, hums commercials, rubs her belly in slow, exaggerated circles. She told Frank, "This child will unite the family." He didn't reply. He just kept slicing the bread. I don't think she meant Reed. She barely looks at him when he speaks now. One afternoon, I watched Reed transfer money on his phone. He clicked too quickly. He didn't notice I was behind him. I saw the app's logo before he closed the screen. He turned and smiled, thin and distracted. "Maddie says this kid's going to change everything. Maybe she's right." I nodded. He patted my shoulder, too light to mean anything. That night I stared at the ceiling and traced the line on my ring finger. I haven't worn my wedding band in months. I keep it in a small box behind my sewing kit. Frank never asked why. Sometimes I think Maddie knew exactly what she was doing, not out of cruelty, out of calculation. She needed Reed to believe. She needed Frank to stay quiet. She needed me to stay small. But a child isn't born out of silence. It's born into it. And I know who the father is. I resealed the envelope. The flap wouldn't stick, so I used a strip of clear tape. In red marker, I wrote one word across the front: truth. I didn't leave it out. I didn't hide it either. I placed it beneath my knitting basket in plain sight, but not where anyone would reach without purpose. Let them find it when the house feels too quiet. Let them read it when no one is watching. There will be a child. That part cannot be undone. But who he belongs to, that's no longer a question. It's a decision no one wants to face. Some people call less to avoid hearing the answer. Maybe you should stop showing up everywhere like some ghost Betty. Maddie didn't even open the door all the way. It makes the neighbors uncomfortable. She glanced over my shoulder like someone might be watching. I stood with a tin of lemon bars in my hand, still warm the cloth, wrapped around them stitched with my initials. The edge of the fabric had frayed one corner already loose. She didn't invite me in. I stepped back before she could close it fully. Not slammed, just deliberate. The kind of closing that didn't need sound to be loud. Later that week, I found Frank out back near the shed, sorting through plastic bins, as if something important might be buried under broken Christmas lights. "You didn't tell me she had the locks changed." He didn't look up. I didn't know until I tried the key. I held the envelope under my jacket. The paper was still creased from the drawer Reed never opened. "Did you sleep with her?" Frank froze one hand in a box labeled cords and stuff. His mouth moved, then stopped. I could hear the rake tapping the side of the shed as the wind shifted it slightly. "No." But Maddie said, "If I didn't go along, Reed would break. He's already fragile." His voice got quieter toward the end. He looked at a pile of bent nails in his palm like they might answer for him. That same afternoon, she cornered me in the kitchen. She was arranging limes in a white bowl, placing the ugliest ones on top. "We're trying to keep the peace," she said without turning. You popping in with that face, it just doesn't help. She finally faced me. Her shirt was tight against her stomach now. She touched it with the back of her hand, like it hurt. I'm being kind, Betty. But honestly, it's embarrassing for everyone. She turned her back again, hummed something off key, and walked away. I sat at the dining table for the last time that night. Reed was distracted, phone face down, but still lighting up. Frank stared at his water glass like he was waiting for it to turn into something stronger. I signed a few papers from Maddie's lawyer, Reed said. Just financial cleanup, combining things for the baby's future. He sounded like a man repeating what someone else told him would sound smart. No one looked at me. I waited 2 weeks before the manila envelope came in the mail. One of those legal folders with brads down the middle. Inside was a series of transfer notices. Property reassigned, trust reallocated, tax advantages detailed in bold. Frank and I were gone from every page. The house previously under Reed's name, originally done for tax simplicity, was now co-owned by Maddie and an unnamed minor heir. The clause describing existing residents had been amended. There were no names attached to that line, just a single sentence, occupancy subject to reevaluation. I called the office that handled the transfer. A young voice answered. I'm sorry, ma'am, there's no record of you on file. She said it twice, as if repetition would make it gentler. When I brought it up at dinner between a pot roast and roasted beets, Reed nodded like I'd asked about the weather. Maddie handled it. It's better this way. Safer. Maddie poured sparkling water into a tall glass and took a slow sip. You're here out of Frank's generosity, Betty. Let's not confuse that with ownership. She wiped the corner of her mouth. You don't really have any rights anymore. Frank cut his meat into small pieces, not looking up once. I folded my napkin in half, then into quarters. Maddie leaned in, lips pressed but smiling. You know, most women your age would be grateful for what you've been given. I stared at the sideboard behind her. The framed photo of Reed's graduation was still there, but my hands had been cropped out when they resized it. She kept going. I mean, you didn't contribute anything financially to the remodel. And the baby's going to need space. I just think logistically it would be cleaner. That word. Cleaner. I looked down at the ring on my finger. The thin gold band was missing a small stone, barely noticeable unless you touched it. I hadn't taken it off in years. Not even when I knew what I knew. She saw me looking at it. Frank's always been sentimental, she murmured, almost amused. I reached for my glass water untouched. You really should consider downsizing, she added. It's not fair to hold on to space you don't need. I didn't answer. Her nails tapped the table. She was already moving on. I waited until Reed got up to take a call. Frank followed slow steps, hands in his pockets. She didn't move. You're angry, she whispered, but you don't want to be alone. You won't risk that. She smoothed a crease in the tablecloth that wasn't there. Besides, what would you even do out there? I stood. She didn't. The room was dim now, only the amber glow of the wall sconce near the kitchen. Her shadow fell longer than mine. I met her eyes. You should pray I choose silence. I didn't say another word. She blinked, but didn't flinch. I turned toward the hallway without taking my sweater. Some silences are loud enough to echo. This one followed me all the way out. I folded each shirt slowly, not because I was sad, but because it was the last thing left I could do carefully. The keys clinked softly when I placed them on the table. No note. No final meal. I took the framed wedding photo off the hallway wall, wrapped it in one of Frank's old undershirts, and tucked it in a cardboard box, already marked Kitchen, Misk. With a dull black marker, nobody asked where I was going. The closet was already half empty before I began. Maddie had started moving storage bins in months ago, seasonal baby things she'd explained, without looking me in the eye. I carried the last box out myself. The steps creaked just like they always had. On the third one down, I paused. The scratch Frank made when we first moved in was still there. He'd blamed the movers. I never told him it was my suitcase handle dragging too fast. Reed didn't come downstairs. His truck was in the driveway, but the blinds in the upstairs bedroom were drawn. Frank stood behind the living room curtain, half hidden. He didn't open the door, just raised one hand like someone waving to a train that wasn't slowing down. I didn't wave back. As I buckled myself in, the sun hit the windshield in a way that made everything else dim. I adjusted the mirror. Maddie stood near the porch, one hand on her hip, the other resting gently on her belly. She didn't wave either. Finally, I heard her say, voice clipped through the crack of the slightly open window, "That old bat knew when to quit." Her laugh was quiet, satisfied, like she'd just cleared space in a cluttered room. I didn't reply, didn't roll the window higher. I let the sentence settle around me like smoke in a closed car. At the stop sign near the end of the street, I slowed. I lowered the window halfway and looked back once. The house didn't look smaller. It looked indifferent. I used to believe I belonged there. That memory, like a key I no longer carried, pressed faintly against my pocket. I parked the car 2 hours later in front of a low beige building with crooked blinds and a mailbox labeled 2B. The stairwell smelled faintly of vinegar and dust, and the railing shook when I gripped it. The apartment had one window, one sink, and walls that still bore the outlines of where someone else's pictures used to hang. I placed my boxes down without unpacking. I stood in the center of the room, waiting for something to echo. I opened every drawer with care, wiped down every counter with a rag from my old kitchen drawer. There was a chip on the corner of the laminate counter shaped like a small tooth. I ran my finger over it back and forth, like it might remember the hand before mine. No one called that night. Not Reed, not Frank, not even a wrong number. The next morning, I used the same rag to clean the baseboard. My hands stung from the cleanser. A small nick on my knuckle had dried in a pattern I didn't want to wash away just yet. There were no curtains, only blinds that snapped if you moved them too fast. I adjusted them slowly, letting the light in like a visitor I wasn't sure I wanted. I found an old radio in the donation bin near the mailroom. It didn't work, but I kept it anyway. Its dial was stuck between stations. I placed it on the windowsill. Later, I made tea in a mug that had once belonged to Reed in middle school. His 5th grade teacher gave it to him. World's okayest student. He'd left it in a garage box labeled trash/donate. I'd rescued it. I drank from it now. It didn't taste like anything. I laid out my dish towel to dry edges curling up like they were shy. I sat on the floor near the heater, turned off but warm from the afternoon sun. I didn't miss the sounds of that house. I missed the space I'd thought I'd had in it. I missed believing I had been needed. When the wind tapped against the window pane, it didn't make me look up. There's a strange sort of peace that comes when no one is watching your silence. When you can fold yourself into corners without having to explain why you're quiet. That afternoon, I swept up 3 small nails and 2 loose buttons from under the cabinet. I lined them on the counter. Someone else's story scattered. I didn't need to know who they'd belong to. I threw them away one at a time. I hung the only picture I brought with me, one of my mother holding a pie in front of a screen door, wearing a dress too long for her frame. The frame had cracked in the move, but I taped it from behind. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't write letters or leave messages or send photos to remind them what I looked like in their absence. I folded the napkin again that night after dinner. Plain rice and an apple sliced thin. I sat at the small table, knees brushing the underside. The chair creaked when I leaned back, and I thought only one thing as the last light left the window. They didn't throw me out. They just finished taking what they wanted. and I finally stopped waiting for permission to leave. No one said my name that morning. No one sighed or called for help from the other room. No misplaced jacket to fold. No door to unlock for someone who left their keys again. Just the floor creaking under my own weight and the sun outlining the space between my feet and the wall. I hadn't seen light fall that honestly in a long time. I used my scarf to wipe the dust from the window. The glass wasn't clean, not yet, but I could see through it. That was enough. I brewed my coffee the old way, a kettle on the stove, not the pod machine Maddie insisted was more modern. I used a chipped mug I found at a second-hand shop, 2 days before green, rim, tiny, flower print, hairline crack near the handle. I held it carefully, not out of fear it would break, but because I knew how something worn can still hold warmth if you don't grip it too hard. The silence was not sharp. It wrapped itself around my shoulders the way a worn cardigan does, soft stretched in the elbows, but dependable. I sat by the window and drank slowly, letting the heat rise through my hands. The wood floor had a splinter near the kitchen threshold. I ran my toe over it each time I passed. It didn't snag, not yet. It just reminded me to walk softer. At noon, I took out the broom. Not because anything was dirty, but I needed to sweep something. The motion was familiar even when the room was not. Back when Reed was younger, I used to sweep in circles around his gaming cords, careful not to unplug anything. He never noticed. But I always made sure his chair didn't wobble when he leaned back too far. I learned to adjust the rug underneath with my foot. I hadn't thought of that in years. There were no texts from him, no calls from Frank, not even one of Maddie's passive-aggressive emoji replies. They were experts in silence now, too. Just not the kind I had grown to trust. The fridge hummed like it had something to say, but never found the words. I wiped the counter with a dish towel that used to be part of an apron. I'd cut the ties and sewn it into rectangles, just enough for drying hands, wiping spills, or folding into small comfort. I bought a chair from a man at the flea market who said it used to belong to his grandmother. "Wicker's a bit warped," he warned. I liked that it didn't apologize for aging. I sat in it every afternoon. It leaned slightly to the right. So did I. At the market, a woman with a cart full of canning jars leaned in. Starting over. Her eyes were gray, not unkind. I shook my head once. "No, I'm living for the first time." She didn't nod or smile, just kept pushing her cart. The receipts from the thrift shop were all folded in half and tucked into the back of a recipe book I no longer used. Not because I might return anything, but because I had always filed things. Order was a comfort, even if it changed nothing. The cabinet in the hallway creaked when I opened it. I placed the DNA envelope inside. No one else had touched it. I'd sealed it again, not because I needed to hide it, but to remind myself some truths are for holding, not waving around. I wrote one word on it in red pen, not in anger, not in accusation, just clarity. Truth. The pen I used had Frank's initials on it. He used to leave it in his coat pocket. I kept it once after a wedding anniversary dinner where he forgot to say anything at all. He never noticed. I found a candle in a drawer, the short kind you get in a set. I lit it that evening. Not for ritual, just because the room looked softer in flickering light. The radiator clicked. Once, then again. I wrapped my sweater tighter across my lap. I had no plans, no list, no place to be. For the first time in 43 years, I didn't belong to a schedule built around someone else's comfort. I didn't make dinner. I just sliced an apple and watched the peel curl into a quiet spiral on the plate. Nothing was waiting. No mouths to feed, just a core and a decision not to throw it away too soon. I opened the window. The screen was crooked. The air outside didn't carry their voices or their excuses or the thin way they used to say thanks. I looked around the room. Every object had been chosen, not inherited, not gifted out of guilt, just chosen. The next morning, a knock came. I didn't hurry to the door. The package was brown taped hastily, a label tucked under layers. No sender, just a printed name. Elizabeth Whitaker. The document inside had bold letters, legal ones. Something about reassignment, transfer, consolidation of assets. I knew those words. I'd signed some of them once thinking it was for tax purposes. This time, the name wasn't mine. It was hers. Maddie Whitaker. Underneath that, a signature I still recognized. Reads. Not a message, not a question, just a stamp and a timeline. I placed the paper next to the candle. Its flame had gone out, but the wick still held its shape. They still wanted more. But I no longer lived in their house. I no longer answered their calls. I no longer stood still when the room was cold. They didn't know I'd already returned everything, except the silence. That I kept. I always thought silence meant peace until I learned it could be mailed to you in a manila envelope with your old address printed in bold. The delivery came Monday morning. I wasn't expecting anything, but I signed for it anyway. My name wasn't on the label, just the words, "Witness requested regarding assets belonging to the Blake family." The address, though, was unmistakable. The house I had mopped for decades. The porch I once polished with lemon oil. The home I no longer had keys to. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. Not because I needed to calm down. Just because old habits take the longest to leave. Reed called that afternoon. He never used to pause between words. Maddie. She thinks you could help maybe sign a few things. Nothing big. Just formalities, Mom. Legal housekeeping. There was noise in the background. A drawer closing, perhaps, or someone walking away quickly. He didn't mention the letter. He didn't ask how I was. He just cleared his throat like he wanted me to forget everything but the pen. I didn't say no, but I also didn't speak. That night I pulled the manila envelope from under the fruit bowl. I had placed 2 apples on top of it as if weight could change intention. I opened it carefully, using the edge of a butter knife. Inside were 4 pages clipped together and stamped twice. My name was missing, but my handwriting wasn't. The signature line had been left blank. The same line I was meant to fill again to make someone else's life look clean. Frank sent a letter the next morning, not typed. His cursive hadn't changed since our first anniversary card. I'm sorry, but I have to side with them. Maddie's carrying our grandchild. He hadn't signed it, love. Just his name, as if that word no longer applied. I folded the letter into thirds and slipped it behind the gas bill. Nothing gets found there. I didn't cry. I dusted the bookshelf. Then I made a call. Meredith Sloan had a voice like glass. Smooth, sharp, never raising itself. She spoke plainly, never in circles. She didn't offer sympathy, just time slots. I met her the following day. Her office had no pictures on the desk, only files stacked by thickness. You said there were things taken, she said, and people who believe you won't fight for them back. I didn't nod. I just handed her the envelope. Do you want the house? No, I said. I want the truth. She leaned back. That was enough. I called Al Crosby next. He used to work with a friend of mine's husband, a man who found a missing Corvette in 2 days. I didn't ask how. Al wore a tan coat and carried a notebook with real pages. He didn't record anything. He listened with the kind of face that didn't blink often. I'll start with her schedule, he said. No assumptions, just patterns. 2 weeks passed. I filled the silence with my own list, the things I had once let slip, the receipts I'd tucked into flower jars. The note Maddie had left on the fridge. Frank says it's fine. Just sign it. The pictures came first. Al slid them across my table one afternoon. He didn't explain them. He didn't need to. Maddie, in a parking lot. Then a lobby. Then a hallway of a hotel I'd driven past for years without noticing. Cole Ramsey was beside her in all of them. No hat, no tools, just his hand on the small of her back. The next folder held transfers. 2 accounts. One under Maddie's maiden name, the other under Reed's. The dates matched Reed's gambling binges. The sender a shadow company with no website and too many numbers. I didn't ask where he got them, I just checked the dates. Then came the final page. Another test. Not the one I had hidden in the cabinet. This one had state seals. Notarized, official, Frank excluded, Reed excluded. Cole Ramsey not excluded. I didn't need the science. I had already known. But knowing and proving aren't the same. Meredith called again the next morning. She didn't waste time. "We're ready," she said. "Not just legally, strategically. She used your silence. Now we use her noise." I didn't speak. The mug in my hand had a chip at the rim. I turned it slightly so it wouldn't touch my lip. "She won't just lose the house," Meredith continued. "She could lose her freedom." I looked out the window. Someone's child was pulling a red wagon along the sidewalk. The wheels stuck for a second on a crack in the pavement. He kept pulling anyway. I thought of Reed then, how his hands used to tremble after a loss, how Maddie once offered him tea and whispered something I couldn't hear, how easily he had learned to sign without reading. They thought I left because I was weak, because I couldn't stand the storm. But storms end. Quiet doesn't. I didn't tell Meredith thank you, I just hung up. There was still tea in the pot. I poured the rest into the sink, rinsed the cup, and placed it upside down to dry. Sometimes power doesn't sound like anything. It just holds its shape. I once believed being defended meant being valued, that someone speaking on your behalf meant you mattered. But now I know silence can be louder than applause, and paying the legal retainer with my own name on the check felt more solid than any vow Frank ever made. The hem of my jacket still held the crease from where I'd folded it over the chair the night before. I straightened it out with a quick press of my hand. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but the air felt crowded enough. I carried no bag, only a manila folder. Inside it, 4 documents, 1 USB drive, and a receipt from the notary's office. The pen clipped to the folder had my initials etched in faint, but mine. Nobody could replace those letters. I didn't look toward Maddie when I walked in. I didn't have to. Her perfume always arrived before she did. Something artificial with too much vanilla. She was seated, hands resting just above the swell of her stomach. Her nails painted the same soft pink as the folders our lawyer had submitted to the judge. When she finally looked at me, her mouth pulled back into something that tried to be a smile. "Well," she said, her voice floating just loud enough for the courtroom clerk to flinch, "guess someone wants to win Grandmother of the Year." Trying to lock up a pregnant woman. You must be proud. I placed the folder on the table. Meredith didn't flinch. Neither did I. "I want that child born into truth," I said, keeping my hands folded in front of me. "That's all." She laughed, then short-clipped. The kind that never makes it to the eyes. The judge arrived. Gavel, names, case numbers. Reed didn't show. Frank wasn't there either. I'd stopped waiting for them a long time ago. Meredith stood first. Calm, precise, no dramatic rhythm to her voice, just facts. Exhibits were submitted, dates aligned. A signature compared side by side, highlighting the subtle curve of an F Frank never used. The handwriting analyst's report, sat in front of the judge before Maddie could even turn her neck, then the emails. Digital traces. Reed's name signed electronically to documents he never read, processed through an IP address Maddie used 5 times in 1 week. Meredith flipped each printed page like she was counting breaths. Maddie leaned in her voice low enough to sting without causing noise. All this? Because I didn't let you feel needed anymore, I looked down at my hands. My thumbnail had a faint crack, barely noticeable, but it caught on the paper edge. It's not about being needed, I said. It's about not letting my silence be mistaken for consent. Then came the photos. A grainy series of hotel lobby stills. Maddie in sunglasses, Cole Ramsey following behind her. They didn't touch, but her hand briefly brushed his lower back as they entered the elevator. One photo showed them exiting 43 minutes later. Another Maddie handing a white envelope to the front desk. The room quieted. I remembered Cole as he was when he first came to us. Calloused hands, hesitant voice, the kind of person who always looked down before he spoke. I hadn't seen him since I moved out. When they called him in, he wore a blue flannel shirt and dark jeans. Nothing formal, just clean. His voice was steady, and he didn't look at me when he took the stand. She told me if I spoke up, she'd say I came on to her, that I was obsessed, that I tried to force something he said. She said pinning the baby on her father-in-law was the safest way to protect her husband from a breakdown. Her words. Nobody coughed. Nobody blinked. And you are the biological father of the child, the judge asked, though we all knew the answer. Cole nodded. Yes, sir. DNA confirms it. Meredith handed the envelope across the table, inside 2 pages signed by a clinic. Frank's name excluded. Reed's excluded. Cole's not excluded. It was underlined in blue. Maddie's face didn't move. Not even a twitch. Her lawyer shifted in his seat, trying to push forward a technicality, but the words came out limp. I didn't look at her again. I looked at the judge, who adjusted his glasses, like the weight of what had just been said pressed against the bridge of his nose. He read the ruling calmly. Madeline Blake, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months probation for document fraud, identity misrepresentation, and financial coercion. The sentence applies regardless of your current pregnancy status. Court adjourned. The sound of the gavel wasn't sharp. It was almost dull, like it had done this many times before. Outside the courtroom, Meredith touched my shoulder gently, as if to ask if I was okay without saying the words. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. Instead, I walked to the small bench by the courthouse window and sat down. The folder was still in my hands. I opened it slowly and pulled out a single sheet, the one that still had my fingerprint smudged near the top, from when I first picked it up weeks ago. It didn't say much. Just a list of what belonged to me, what had been taken, and what had been returned. No one waited for me outside. No cameras. No voices raised in judgment or congratulations. Only a small crack in the marble floor beneath my feet. Faint. Like it had always been there. I didn't step around it. I sat still. And for the first time in a long while, I let that stillness speak for itself. I never liked the way silence echoes on tile floors. Too clean, too final. Like nothing ever lived there. The envelope came back unopened. His name, still written in my handwriting, angled just enough to suggest hesitation. I'd used the same pen I kept near the stove for grocery lists. I chose not to write anything else on it. No return address, no note. Just the weight of its contents speaking for itself. Truth never needed padding. I signed the new deed that morning. The notary barely looked up from her tablet when she handed me the pen. One signature. One witness. One house now solely mine. The same house where my name had once been removed without so much as a question. This time, I didn't speak. I just pressed the pen down hard enough to feel the indent through the page below. Meredith gave me a nod, the kind professionals give to close a chapter. I kept my hands folded. The ring I no longer wore left a pale circle on my finger like a ghost marking territory. I touched it without thinking, then put my hand back in my lap. I didn't return to the house that evening, not to stay. I just needed one final look without needing to knock. I stepped through the back door, my door, and walked the hallway without flicking a single light. My shoes left faint marks on the hardwood damp from the drizzle outside. The air still smelled like her perfume. Something artificial sweet and never quite settling. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, I left the wedding ring. No box. No ribbon. Just the band itself, gold dulled from years of dishwater and compromise. I placed it directly on the stone, right where Frank had first placed the engagement ring after I'd said yes. I didn't write a note. It would have felt like explaining something that no longer required permission. I'd already forwarded the documents to the court to legally restore my name. Not Gardner. Whitaker. My mother's name. The one sewn into the hem of my childhood dresses. The name that never asked me to shrink. The photo I mailed to Reed was from his wedding. The only one I kept. I folded it neatly down the center, right across my own face. Not torn, not burned, just folded, creased in a way that could still be smoothed out if he ever wanted. I didn't expect him to. With it, I included the court's official notice of Maddie's sentence. 18 months suspended. House arrest once the child was born. Fraud, forgery, digital impersonation. I highlighted nothing. The bolded header said enough. Beneath that, I placed a copy of the paternity result. His name excluded. Frank's excluded. The only one not excluded, Cole Ramsey. I'd underlined it with a red pen, not for drama, but for clarity. Sometimes people pretend not to see unless something bleeds. I clipped all 3 pages together and wrapped them in an old linen napkin, blue trim. From our first Thanksgiving set, before Maddie ever came into the picture. On top of the bundle, I wrote one sentence in capital letters. Gaps can be folded, but they never disappear. I didn't add a return address. Later, I sold half the house. Not to a corporation or investor, but to a young couple who reminded me of who Frank and I had once pretended to be. She wore work boots and carried a notebook. He held the tape measure and said little. They paid what I asked without haggling. They didn't ask about the past. They only cared about the garden and the roofline. The garage still had his fishing gear. I left it untouched. Some things don't need reclaiming. They just need time to rust. I moved into a small townhouse off Orchard Lane. Brick siding, no gate. The kind of place where people hang wind chimes without irony. The air smelled like soil, not money. I planted rosemary in a chipped pot and kept it by the window. Every morning I watered it with the same old mug from the Gardner house, the one with the handle hairline cracked, but still holding. A letter from Frank arrived 2 weeks after the court ruling. It was handwritten, no salutation. Just 4 lines. I didn't stop it. That's the part I can't explain, not even to myself. I hope that's enough. I didn't write back. I folded it and placed it inside the drawer with my insurance policies. Next to it, I tucked away the pink baby sock Maddie once dropped near my purse, months before anything unraveled. I hadn't returned it. I don't know why. The courthouse called last Friday. They said Maddie would begin her probation from the hospital once the child arrived. I was asked if I'd be listed for visitation. I said no. The woman paused, then replied, "We'll leave that line blank then." That seemed about right. A neighbor, Mrs. Klein, saw me on the porch the next morning. She waved from across the hedge. "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded. "Starting over?" "No," I said. "I'm just starting right." She smiled and went back to watering her roses. I watched the petals collect droplets like tiny mirrors. Later that evening, I laid out a quilt my mother made, patches stitched from her blouses, her church dresses, even an apron. One of the buttons had fallen off years ago, but the thread still showed where it once held. I traced that empty spot with my finger until the light faded. I used to think justice looked like someone saying sorry. Now I know it looks more like paper trails and clean breaks, and walking out of a house without needing to slam the door. I used to measure mornings by how quickly I could clear the table before someone noticed crumbs. Today, I let the crumbs stay. I boiled water in the ceramic kettle Maddie once called quaint. The glaze is chipped near the handle, barely noticeable unless you've held it long enough to know where the crack runs. I poured the water slowly, let the steam rise up and blur the window, then sat in the wicker chair near the light. I didn't reach for a book. I didn't look at the clock. I let the bread cool without buttering it. Just breathing. Just present. The room has changed quietly around me. I've rearranged nothing extravagant. A shelf of mismatched tea tins. A cloth napkin I stitched when I was learning how to sew again, not because anyone needed me to, but because I wanted the rhythm of thread and loop. There are 3 black and white photographs pinned on the wall. A woman I barely remember being a grassy hill in Tennessee and a tattered umbrella that once belonged to my mother. I kept them for their silence, not their stories. There are no pictures of Reed, none of Frank, none of the baby I will never hold. The family album sits inside the bottom drawer of my writing desk. I didn't burn it. I didn't toss it away. I simply placed it out of reach from my present. The clasp is stiff. I touched it once last week and let my hand fall before I could open it. Some things deserve to be kept whole by remaining shut. A white envelope lies on the table, postmarked 3 days ago. The handwriting is his. Slanted, careful. Not quite steady. Mom, I'm sorry. I've started attending Gamblers Anonymous. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I hope one day you'll let me talk to you. Love, Reed. I folded the letter back along its original crease. No tears, no trembling, just the weight of paper returning to its place beneath my coaster. I hadn't noticed the ring it left until this morning, circular, faint, almost like a watermark pressed from something once treasured. There's nothing else to say about the envelope, not today. Instead, I trimmed the rosebush on the windowsill. The soil still damp from yesterday's watering. I never thought I had a green thumb, but the white blooms are small and stubborn. A woman at the nursery told me they only thrive with regular pruning. She didn't mean people, but I thought of them anyway. A knock came from my neighbor's unit downstairs. Children's laughter spilled out onto the landing. Their voices rose and fell like little bells, quick and without agenda. One of them yelled something about toast. Another shouted back about marbles. I let the sound roll up into my apartment and stay a while. Nobody in that hallway knows I used to be someone else in a much bigger house. No one here knows about the court hearings or the forged deeds or the woman who married into my family like it was a chess game. No one here calls me Reed's mom or Frank's wife. No one leaves notes in the mailbox asking for favors and forgetting thank yous. No one looks through me like I'm part of the wallpaper. Here, I'm Betty Whitaker. The name is mine again, filed with the county clerk, stamped with quiet finality. I used to sign Gardner out of obligation. Now I write Whitaker with both hands steady. I sold half the old house. Not to Reed, not to Frank, to a young couple expecting twins. They didn't ask why the mantel still held a ring-shaped indentation or why there was a faint mark above the bedroom door where I used to tape reminders to myself. I left the ring in the fireplace niche. No explanation. I figured if they were sentimental, they'd make up a story of their own. When the paperwork finalized, the notary smiled and said, "Congratulations on closing the chapter." I only nodded. Some chapters don't end with closure. Some just drift into quiet. I walk every morning now, past the laundromat with faded signage, past the diner with the torn red stools. There's a tailor who waves each time I pass. He's never altered anything for me, but I think he appreciates someone who nods back. I bought a canvas bag from a second-hand shop. It still smells faintly of oranges, and I use it for groceries and books I don't always read. Last Sunday, I saw Frank in the grocery parking lot. He didn't see me. He stood next to a cart full of baby wipes and bottled water, and a new woman leaned against the driver's side door tapping something into her phone. I didn't change my pace. I didn't hide. I just walked on. Sometimes not looking back is the kindest thing you can offer. I no longer set the table for guests who never come. I fold the laundry and let it sit on the chair as long as it wants. I don't answer every message. I don't owe answers. I don't attend church socials. I don't avoid them either. I just go when the wind is right and the pie doesn't feel forced. I don't need people to know my name, but if they ask, I tell them. It's Betty. Just Betty. There's peace in not being of anyone. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I poured another cup. The steam softened the air. The rose tilted slightly in the sun, its petals barely shifting, but still open. A life doesn't need applause to be worthy. It only needs breathing room. I watched the shadows slide across the floor and thought, not for the first time, how quiet survival can be. How full. How exact. I used to think that the parts of me left behind defined the rest of me. I was wrong. I am not the tea she dismissed. I am not the ring he left. I am not the silence they handed back to me like charity. I am the woman who chose to stay still and in doing so became whole. And I am still here. Not waiting, just living because I deserve to.